Have you ever felt the weight of faith pressing down on your shoulders, questioning whether you are truly enough in the eyes of Allah? Many believers struggle with the idea that being a good Muslim requires perfection, complete adherence to every rule, or flawless practice of every ritual. Faith is not about perfection. It is about the heart, the intention, and the sincerity with which you strive to connect with the divine. Understanding what it truly means to be a good Muslim can free the heart from fear, guilt, and comparison, allowing spirituality to flourish authentically and meaningfully in your daily life. Being a good Muslim is a concept often misunderstood because it is so frequently tied to rigid measurements of perfection, outward appearances, and flawless adherence to every rule. Yet Islam is a faith that prioritizes the inner state of the heart above all else, and it recognizes that human beings are inherently imperfect, fallible, and continuously in need of guidance and growth. The essence of being a good Muslim lies not in performing every action perfectly, but in cultivating a sincere, conscious connection with Allah, in striving to align one's intentions, behavior, and choices with divine guidance, and in making a consistent effort to grow spiritually. Many believers carry the weight of guilt and inadequacy, thinking that missing certain acts or struggling to maintain regular rituals disqualifies them from being righteous or beloved in the eyes of Allah. However, this perspective misses the fundamental principle of faith that sincerity, intention, and heartfelt striving are the true measures of devotion. Every small act done with awareness and a desire to please Allah carries value, and every moment spent turning back to Him, asking for guidance, and seeking to improve oneself is a reflection of genuine faith. Perfection is not required. Effort, mindfulness, and the willingness to seek closeness to God define a good Muslim far more accurately than flawless performance. The misconception that being a good Muslim demands total perfection often leads to unnecessary stress, fear, and self-condemnation. Islam teaches that the human heart is central to spirituality and that Allah judges not the outward appearance alone, but the intention, struggles, and sincerity behind every action. A person who prays imperfectly yet with true presence of heart, who gives with humility and compassion, who seeks forgiveness and strives for moral growth, exemplifies devotion more authentically than one whose actions are mechanically performed without awareness or love. Striving to improve is itself a form of worship, and acknowledging imperfection is not a weakness, but a recognition of one's dependence on divine mercy. The journey of faith is lifelong, encompassing ups and downs, successes and failures, growth and setbacks, and it is the resilience of the heart and the sincerity of effort that ultimately matters most. Small, consistent steps in faith, whether in prayer, kindness, reflection, or self-discipline, are multiplied in value by Allah, and they reflect the true spirit of devotion that cannot be captured merely by external measurements. A critical aspect of this understanding is the distinction between striving for betterment and succumbing to guilt or despair. Many believers fall into the trap of thinking that minor lapses or unfulfilled practices invalidate their faith, yet Islam consistently emphasizes hope, mercy, and personal growth. The Prophet taught that Allah's mercy surpasses all shortcomings, and that a sincere heart is always recognized, regardless of the imperfections in outward practice. Being a good Muslim does not mean living without mistakes. It means returning to Allah with sincerity, striving to improve, and allowing faith to guide thought, intention, and behavior. Every effort, no matter how small, carries significance when done with awareness and love, and the pursuit of improvement is itself an ongoing act of devotion. This perspective transforms faith from a burdensome checklist into a living, breathing relationship with the divine, where the heart is nurtured, the soul is strengthened, and the believer is empowered to grow authentically. It encourages self-compassion, understanding, and patience, recognizing that the path of faith is as much about the inner journey as it is about external observance. Understanding that being a good Muslim is not synonymous with perfection liberates believers from the weight of comparison, guilt, and societal expectations. Every individual's spiritual journey is unique, shaped by personal circumstances, strengths, and challenges, and faith must be experienced authentically rather than measured against rigid external standards. Intentions, reflection, moral integrity, and conscious effort create the foundation of true devotion, and these cannot always be quantified by outward compliance. This approach also cultivates humility, reminding believers that judgment belongs to Allah alone, and that external appearances do not capture the full depth of the heart or the sincerity of effort. Empowered by this understanding, Muslims can approach their faith with clarity, purpose, and motivation, recognizing that every sincere act, however small, contributes to spiritual growth and divine proximity. The focus shifts from fear of inadequacy to mindful striving, from guilt to hope, and from mechanical adherence to heartfelt devotion. By embracing the essence of faith, believers cultivate a resilient, sincere, and spiritually alive connection with Allah, demonstrating that being a good Muslim is measured not by perfection in action, but by the integrity, intention, and sincerity of the heart. Faith is therefore a continuous journey of the heart, one where striving, reflection, and sincerity matter more than flawless performance. A good Muslim is someone who seeks to align their inner life with divine guidance, who makes consistent effort to improve, and who recognizes that Allah values sincerity, intention, and moral consciousness above rigid perfection. This understanding frees the believer from undue self-condemnation, nurtures authentic spiritual growth, and allows the heart to flourish in connection with Allah. Being a good Muslim is not about checking off every ritual perfectly. It is about nurturing the heart, striving sincerely and trusting that Allah's mercy, guidance, and wisdom encompass all human limitations. By focusing on intention, sincerity, and continuous effort, believers can cultivate a faith that is authentic, meaningful, and deeply transformative, embodying the true essence of devotion and the heart-centered spirituality that Islam encourages. The question of whether one can be a good Muslim without practicing everything perfectly is one that touches deeply on the human experience of faith. And it is a question that often weighs heavily on the hearts of believers who strive to balance devotion with the realities of daily life, personal limitations, and human imperfection. Many people approach Islam with the sincere desire to embody its principles fully, yet the weight of expectations, both self-imposed and socially influenced, can create a sense of inadequacy, as if their devotion is only valid if every rule is observed flawlessly, every ritual performed without error, and every moral standard met without exception. However, this perspective overlooks a fundamental teaching of Islam, that the essence of faith is rooted not in outward perfection, but in the intention, sincerity, and consciousness of the heart. A Muslim's relationship with Allah is inherently personal, and it is the heart, more than the outward act, that defines the authenticity and value of one's devotion. Human beings are inherently fallible. Imperfection is not a flaw in the spiritual journey, but an integral part of it, a natural condition that makes the reliance on divine guidance, mercy, and forgiveness both necessary and meaningful. The Prophet's teachings consistently emphasize the primacy of intention, showing that even actions that are outwardly small or incomplete can hold immense spiritual weight if performed sincerely and with consciousness of Allah. This understanding fundamentally reframes the concept of being a good Muslim, shifting the focus from a checklist of actions to a mindful, heart-centered practice that values quality, intention, and spiritual authenticity over mechanical perfection. When a believer internalizes this perspective, they begin to see that faith is a living, evolving relationship that grows through reflection, struggle, and genuine effort, rather than a rigid system in which human shortcomings render one's devotion insufficient or meaningless. Furthermore, Islam recognizes that every individual's circumstances, abilities, and capacities are different, and thus the expectations placed on the heart and spirit are always measured in accordance with what the person can bear. The mercy and justice of Allah encompass the limitations and struggles of human beings, and therefore the path to being a good Muslim is not uniform or monolithic. It is deeply personal and uniquely tailored to each soul. Striving to act in accordance with faith while acknowledging imperfection is not a sign of weakness, but of conscious engagement. A recognition that spiritual growth is a journey rather than a destination. Many believers struggle with guilt when they fail to perform every ritual or meet every standard. Yet this guilt can be transformed into a motivating force when approached with understanding, self-compassion, and awareness that Allah values effort, sincerity, and the continual turning of the heart toward Him. Even small acts of devotion, when performed with mindfulness and love, are magnified in spiritual significance, illustrating that the depth and authenticity of one's connection with Allah are far more important than the mere quantity of practices observed. The emphasis on intention also serves to liberate believers from the burden of comparison, reminding them that spirituality is not a competition or a measure against others, a deeply personal dialogue between the soul and its creator. External appearances, social conformity, or mechanical compliance cannot capture the true state of the heart. And therefore, striving for authenticity, reflection, and moral consciousness is far more aligned with the principles of Islam than a rigid insistence on flawless execution. This perspective also reinforces the understanding that struggle, doubt, and imperfection are natural and necessary elements of faith, providing opportunities for growth, humility, and deeper connection with Allah. In this light, being a good Muslim is not diminished by moments of weakness, lapses in practice, or human error. Rather, it is defined by the resilience of the heart, the sincerity of intention, and the persistent effort to seek closeness to the divine despite challenges. Islam's teachings encourage believers to focus on the internal dimensions of faith: compassion, justice, humility, gratitude, and the striving for moral excellence over external metrics alone, emphasizing that spiritual success is measured by the quality of the heart's engagement and the authenticity of effort rather than by perfection in ritual observance. By embracing this understanding, believers are empowered to cultivate a balanced, meaningful, and sustainable spiritual life, one in which devotion grows organically through reflection practice and the ongoing pursuit of closeness to Allah, and where imperfection is not a source of despair, but a catalyst for sincere striving, self-improvement, and spiritual resilience. Recognizing that being a good Muslim is defined by heart intention and effort liberates the believer from fear, guilt, and the paralyzing weight of comparison, fostering a relationship with Allah that is authentic, compassionate, and deeply transformative. And it reinforces the timeless truth that divine mercy encompasses human limitation, effort carries profound significance, and sincerity of intention is the cornerstone of all acts of faith. In this way, the spiritual journey becomes not a burden of perfection to bear, but an invitation to grow, to strive, and to cultivate an enduring, intimate, and heartfelt connection with Allah, where every sincere step, no matter how small, contributes meaningfully to the believer's path of faith, moral development, and spiritual fulfillment. The concept of being a good Muslim extends far beyond mere outward conformity to rules and rituals. It is fundamentally an expression of the heart's orientation toward Allah, the sincerity of intention behind actions, and the ongoing effort to embody spiritual and moral principles in everyday life. Many believers wrestle with the misconception that perfection in practice is a prerequisite for spiritual worthiness, and this pressure can create anxiety, self-doubt, and feelings of inadequacy. Yet Islam consistently teaches that the heart is the primary measure of faith, and that even incomplete, imperfect, or small acts performed with consciousness, sincerity, and devotion are meaningful and valued in the sight of Allah. This perspective shifts the focus from rigid legalism to a dynamic, heart-centered approach, emphasizing the transformative power of intention, reflection, and mindful engagement. The beauty of Islam lies in its recognition of human limitation. It does not demand flawless execution, rather a continuous striving for improvement, a turning of the heart toward the divine, and a conscious effort to align actions with ethical and spiritual ideals. A believer who struggles to maintain every practice but approaches life with integrity, humility, and compassion embodies the very essence of faith, demonstrating that spiritual excellence is not synonymous with ritual perfection. The heart's engagement, moral consciousness, and consistent effort to grow spiritually are what define the quality of a Muslim's devotion. Acts such as offering prayer imperfectly but with presence, extending kindness to others despite personal hardship, seeking forgiveness sincerely, or reflecting on the ethical implications of one's actions carry profound spiritual weight. Each moment of intentional engagement with faith, no matter how small or incomplete, contributes to a cumulative development of character, moral clarity, and spiritual resilience, illustrating that perfection is not the standard. Effort, sincerity, and awareness are. This understanding liberates believers from the paralyzing fear of inadequacy, allowing them to embrace faith as a lifelong journey of growth, reflection, and sincere striving rather than a static test of flawless performance. Furthermore, it fosters a sense of self-compassion and patience, acknowledging that human beings are inherently fallible and that missteps or lapses in practice are natural components of a lived spiritual journey. By embracing imperfection as an opportunity for growth, believers cultivate humility, reliance on divine mercy, and resilience in the face of challenges, reinforcing the notion that being a good Muslim is measured by the heart's orientation, intentionality, and persistent effort rather than a rigid checklist of actions. This heart-centered approach also underscores the deeply personal and individualized nature of faith, reminding believers that spirituality cannot be fully assessed through external appearances, societal standards, or comparisons with others. Each person's relationship with Allah is unique, shaped by their circumstances, capacities, experiences, and struggles, and therefore spiritual excellence manifests differently in every individual's life. The emphasis on intention and effort rather than flawless execution recognizes the diversity of human experience and the necessity of accommodating personal limitations without diminishing the value of sincere devotion. Small acts performed consistently, even if imperfect, are multiplied in spiritual significance, illustrating the principle that quality and authenticity of engagement surpass quantity or superficial adherence. Islam teaches that the divine is aware of every thought, every struggle, and every effort, and it is this awareness that ultimately defines spiritual merit. Recognizing this truth transforms the believer's approach to faith, reframing it from a burdensome obligation into a source of solace, motivation, and personal growth. Instead of focusing on what has been missed or done incorrectly, the believer can shift attention to the sincerity of their intentions, the lessons derived from mistakes, and the continuous pursuit of spiritual and moral improvement. This mindset encourages resilience, as the heart is strengthened not by the absence of error, but by the conscious effort to seek guidance, rectify shortcomings, deepen connection with Allah. Moreover, it alleviates the unnecessary guilt and fear that often accompany struggles with consistency in practice, reminding believers that divine mercy is ever present and that sincere striving is always recognized and rewarded. Understanding that being a good Muslim is about intention and effort also promotes ethical awareness, empathy, and compassionate engagement with the world, as the believer's actions are guided by mindfulness, reflection, and a sincere desire to align with divine principles rather than mere compliance with external rules. In this framework, faith becomes an empowering force rather than a source of anxiety, enabling believers to navigate life's complexities with moral clarity, spiritual resilience, and a sense of purpose that stems from heartfelt devotion. The essence of being a good Muslim, therefore, is not the flawless execution of rituals, but the authenticity, sincerity, and consciousness with which one seeks to live in alignment with Allah's guidance. Every moment of reflection, every act of kindness, every intentional choice contributes to a holistic, living faith, reminding believers that spiritual worth is measured by the quality of the heart, the depth of intention, and the consistent striving to embody divine guidance, even amidst human imperfection, challenges, and limitations. This understanding transforms the journey of faith from a source of pressure and self-doubt into a lifelong opportunity for growth, moral development, and intimate connection with Allah, allowing the believer to flourish spiritually while embracing human vulnerability, striving sincerely, and cultivating a resilient, heartfelt relationship with the divine. The idea of being a good Muslim without practicing every aspect of Islam perfectly requires a deeper understanding of the principles that form the essence of faith, which emphasize the heart, intention, and conscious effort far above mechanical adherence or external appearances. Human beings are inherently imperfect, and Islam recognizes this as a natural condition rather than a flaw in the spiritual journey. The religion emphasizes that the heart's orientation, moral consciousness, and sincere striving are the ultimate measures of devotion, making faith an ongoing process rather than a static achievement. Many believers carry the burden of guilt when they perceive themselves as falling short, thinking that lapses in ritual, moral missteps, inconsistent practice indicate a deficiency in belief. However, this perspective fails to account for the profound teaching that Allah evaluates the heart intentions and effort more than the outward form of actions. Even imperfect deeds, when performed sincerely, are significant and carry immense spiritual weight. For instance, someone who prays inconsistently but approaches each act with mindful presence and demonstrates a level of sincerity that surpasses ritualistic perfection, devoid of awareness or love. Similarly, acts of kindness, forgiveness, generosity, and moral reflection performed with intentionality reflect genuine faith, illustrating that the scope of being a good Muslim encompasses more than ritual compliance. Faith, therefore, is measured by engagement with the divine, the consistency of conscious effort, and the capacity to strive for moral and spiritual improvement despite human limitations. This understanding encourages believers to approach their spiritual journey with patience, self-compassion, and resilience, recognizing that imperfection is not a barrier to divine acceptance, but an invitation to growth, reflection, and reliance on Allah's mercy. Small, intentional steps, whether in prayer, reflection, ethical conduct, or personal improvement, accumulate over time to cultivate a profound connection with the divine. demonstrating that spiritual depth is cultivated through conscious effort rather than flawless performance. Moreover, understanding the primacy of intention helps believers navigate the inevitable struggles, distractions, and challenges of daily life without succumbing to despair or self-condemnation. Human life is inherently full of trials, competing responsibilities, emotional struggles, and moments of weakness, and Islam's guidance is designed to accommodate these realities rather than impose unattainable perfection. By focusing on intention, reflection, and moral alignment, a believer cultivates an authentic, resilient, and heartfelt relationship with Allah where each conscious effort, no matter how small or imperfect, contributes meaningfully to spiritual growth and ethical development. This heart-centered approach transforms the believer's perception of faith from a rigid checklist into a dynamic journey of personal growth, conscious striving, and intimate connection with the divine, where mistakes and shortcomings become opportunities for learning, self-improvement, and renewed devotion rather than sources of shame or failure. Another vital dimension of this understanding is the recognition that faith is deeply personal and individualized, shaped by each person's circumstances, capacities, and life experiences. The expectation of universal, flawless adherence to all rituals and rules fails to appreciate the diversity of human abilities and the challenges inherent in daily life. Islam recognizes that each believer's journey is unique, and the spiritual value of actions is measured by the heart's effort and sincerity rather than by comparison to others. This perspective alleviates the paralyzing pressure many experience when evaluating their faith through external standards or the practices of those around them. Prioritizing intention, authenticity, and conscious effort, believers are empowered to focus on their own spiritual growth and moral development, cultivating a sense of purpose and self-compassion. Small, consistent acts of devotion performed mindfully and sincerely carry immense spiritual significance, often multiplied by divine wisdom in ways that human perception cannot fully grasp. These acts need not be grand or flawless to hold value. Even a brief moment of sincere reflection, a kind word, or a conscious effort to avoid wrongdoing is counted and cherished in the sight of Allah. This understanding fosters humility and patience, reminding believers that spiritual progress is measured by effort and awareness rather than by an unattainable ideal of perfection. Recognizing that being a good Muslim is a reflection of the heart's orientation allows individuals to navigate moments of struggle, inconsistency, and doubt without despair, seeing each challenge as an opportunity for growth, reflection, and spiritual resilience. Furthermore, this perspective encourages believers to cultivate moral and ethical awareness in everyday life, allowing spirituality to manifest not only in rituals but also in the way they treat others, respond to challenges, and strive for personal and social justice. Faith becomes a living, breathing practice that permeates every aspect of life rather than a compartmentalized obligation measured solely by ritual adherence. Central to this discussion is the role of divine mercy and forgiveness, which underscores the principle that human imperfection does not disqualify anyone from being a good Muslim. Islam emphasizes that Allah's understanding of human limitation, compassion for struggles, and valuation of sincere effort surpass all human judgment and external metrics. A believer who strives with sincerity, seeks forgiveness when they fall short, and consciously attempts to improve exemplifies the essence of devotion. In this framework, mistakes and lapses are not failures, but natural components of the journey, providing opportunities for reflection, humility, and deeper reliance on divine guidance. The concept of intention also ensures that each individual's unique circumstances and capacities are acknowledged, creating a fair and balanced measure of spiritual worth that does not rely solely on outward observance. By internalizing these principles, believers are liberated from guilt, fear, and the paralyzing pursuit of unattainable perfection, allowing them to approach faith with hope, motivation, and authenticity. The spiritual journey is thus reframed as an ongoing process of learning, striving, and growing where effort and sincerity matter more than flawless execution, and where the heart's alignment with Allah's guidance is the ultimate measure of success. This understanding empowers believers to cultivate resilience, self-compassion, and a sustained connection with Allah, recognizing that each moment of intentional engagement, regardless of human limitations, contributes to spiritual growth, ethical development, and personal fulfillment. Ultimately, the essence of being a good Muslim lies not in the perfection of outward actions, in the depth of intention, the sincerity of effort, and the consistent striving of the heart to seek closeness to Allah, demonstrating that spiritual authenticity and moral consciousness are the true markers of faith, capable of transforming the believer's life in profound and meaningful ways. The understanding of what it means to be a good Muslim without practicing every rule or ritual perfectly requires a profound reflection on the nature of faith, human limitation, and the mercy of Allah. Many believers carry the weight of guilt and inadequacy because they measure their worth in spiritual standing against rigid standards or the flawless performance of others, believing that any lapse in practice diminishes their faith. Yet Islam consistently teaches that the heart, the intention behind actions, and the conscious striving toward divine guidance are far more significant than outward perfection. Faith is a deeply personal, dynamic relationship between the believer and Allah, and it cannot be reduced to a checklist of actions or external observances. Every act performed with sincerity, no matter how small, holds value when the heart is mindful of the divine. For example, a person who prays inconsistently yet approaches each prayer with presence, reflection, and humility demonstrates a sincerity that surpasses the performance of those who complete rituals mechanically without engagement of the heart or mindfulness of intent. Similarly, kindness, honesty, forgiveness, moral reflection, and compassion toward others, when performed intentionally and conscientiously, are considered acts of devotion in Islam, reflecting the integration of spiritual values into daily life. The religion recognizes that human beings are inherently imperfect, and that struggle, failure, and inconsistency are natural aspects of the spiritual journey, not indicators of inadequacy or spiritual failure. By embracing this perspective, believers can transform their relationship with faith from one of fear, guilt, or anxiety into a source of hope, growth, and resilience. Understanding that perfection is neither expected nor required allows the believer to approach Islam as a living, evolving practice in which sincere effort, continuous reflection, and moral consciousness are the ultimate measures of devotion. The concept of intention, or niyya, lies at the heart of this understanding, emphasizing that the internal state of the heart defines the quality of actions more than their external form. Islam teaches that Allah evaluates the inner dimensions of human effort, weighing the struggles, sincerity, and consistency of the heart rather than merely counting outward acts. This principle fundamentally shifts the perception of what it means to be a good Muslim. It acknowledges that individuals face varying capacities, circumstances, and life challenges, and that spiritual growth is a process rather than a fixed standard of achievement. The focus on intention provides both reassurance and empowerment to believers, allowing them to engage with their faith authentically and meaningfully without the paralyzing burden of trying to attain perfection in every moment. Even small actions, when performed mindfully and with the desire to seek Allah's pleasure, carry significance beyond what human perception can measure. A brief prayer offered sincerely, moment of ethical reflection, or a conscious choice to act justly despite personal difficulty reflects a level of devotion that surpasses rote adherence to rituals without engagement. Recognizing this reality transforms the believer's approach to faith from one dominated by guilt and fear into a path of ongoing learning, reflection, and spiritual development. Each lapse or imperfection becomes an opportunity to seek forgiveness, cultivate humility, and strengthen one's reliance on divine guidance rather than a reason for despair. Moreover, this understanding underscores the deeply personal and individualized nature of faith, highlighting that spirituality cannot be reduced to comparison with others or external judgments. Each believer's journey is unique, shaped by their experiences, capabilities, challenges, and personal relationship with Allah. Attempting to measure spiritual success by comparison or by rigid external standards ignores the complexity of human life and undermines the heart-centered essence of devotion. By focusing on sincerity, intention, and conscious effort, believers cultivate a spiritual resilience that accommodates human limitation, acknowledges growth over time, and values moral and ethical development alongside ritual observance. Small, consistent acts of conscious devotion integrated into daily life carry immense weight and often achieve a deeper spiritual impact than outwardly perfect but mechanically performed rituals. Islam's emphasis on the heart and intention also encourages believers to act with integrity and compassion in every aspect of life, extending devotion beyond ritual into ethical living, social responsibility, and empathetic engagement with others. Spiritual maturity, therefore, is measured not by flawless compliance, but by the depth of moral and spiritual awareness, the sincerity of effort, and the persistent striving to align one's life with divine guidance. Divine mercy and forgiveness are central to understanding the possibility of being a good Muslim without practicing everything perfectly. Islam teaches that Allah's compassion surpasses human understanding and that sincere effort, struggle, and the turning of the heart toward Him are always recognized and valued. Human imperfection is not a limitation on spiritual worth. Rather, it is an opportunity for growth, reflection, and deeper reliance on divine guidance. By internalizing this truth, believers are liberated from self-condemnation, fear, and the paralyzing pursuit of unattainable perfection. Faith becomes a source of empowerment, resilience, and hope, allowing the individual to navigate life's challenges with mindfulness, ethical integrity, and heartfelt devotion. Recognizing that being a good Muslim is defined by heart, intention, and effort transforms the spiritual journey into a continuous process of growth and learning, in which each sincere act contributes meaningfully to personal and moral development. Mistakes and inconsistencies do not negate one's faith. They are natural aspects of a human life fully engaged in the pursuit of divine proximity, and they provide opportunities to cultivate patience, humility, and spiritual depth. Understanding this allows believers to approach Islam as a living, breathing relationship with Allah, one in which sincerity, reflection, and moral consciousness define true devotion, and where the heart's striving is valued above mechanical perfection. Ultimately, the essence of being a good Muslim lies not in flawless practice, but in the authenticity, consistency, and heartfelt engagement of the believer's inner life. Demonstrating that sincere effort, conscious intention, and moral awareness are the true hallmarks of faith, capable of nurturing resilience, spiritual growth, and an intimate, transformative connection with Allah.